Hi everyone, my name is Anthony and I'm the creator of Redact, a browser add-on being released to the Google Chrome store. Uh, I'm basically built a browser add-on to facilitate privacy in the emerging world of AI. And I want to cover some interesting topics that I think most people are aware of, but just kind of pull it together and kind of explain why I made this browser add-on. So I guess we could start and I'll run through it. And I just want to take this moment to thank everybody for watching and I appreciate your time. Just a little bit about me. My name is Anthony. I have about 15 years of cybersecurity engineering experience. I've worked mainly in infrastructure security for some time. I've been working on a lot of projects pertaining to AI as per the infrastructure security around a lot of AI projects. I want to cover things that I've noticed, and I also want to cover, articles to support my case of why I think there's some dangers I want to highlight from a security perspective, and that kind of it's interesting to anybody who's really concerned about online privacy. And I think that this tool that I innovated or created, it's nothing special. It's nothing out of this world. I just don't see a tool like this in the Google store, and I decided, hey, maybe I should build one because I think I need this, given what I've learned so far. So yeah, and my experience, I've worked at multiple industries, a service provider as well as an enterprise environment, and I really once again appreciate the opportunity. So let's run through it. So I created this paint on Visio, and I apologize for the presentation, but I think it's important to kind of talk about in a lot of ways, make it a little bit better. And basically, what I want to cover is the foundational model. So there's a handful of AI foundation models that are basically these I'll classify them as more so like nation state and large companies that actually own these really back end foundational models. And what's really happening here, I think that everybody's hyped with Nvidia and their GPUs and all that jazz, and we're seeing that. I personally believe, and I'm just going to put my opinions out there, I think that's inflated. I think what's happening is we're transitioning into an inference economy, meaning that most of these existing SaaS companies, most of these existing application companies and new companies, they're not really hosting their own GPU rack. I don't think they are using AWS GPU resources, maybe to some extent, and build their own LLM model and all that jazz. But I do think a lot of these companies are basically just have an inference. They're providing their inference, and they're just piping everything back to a back end, foundational model. Whether it's OpenAI, whether it's one of these up here, Grok or Gemini or what may have you, Meta, Llamas, Badu, Jurassic, all that jazz. And I think that's what's happening. I think that from what I'm seeing in the market, from what I'm working on in the ethos, that is the reoccurring theme I'm seeing. And I started to think about this a little bit more deeply, and maybe I got a little bit too paranoid, but I start realizing that the retail person, the average user, who's basically just using AI for the everyday thing, they don't understand the danger of what this is and how this could negatively impact you. And I basically believe that a human being, I have this guy named Fred in my diagram, but Fred on the bottom basically is a dimensional person. Human beings are dimensional, meaning that when I say that, I mean that when you go to work and you sit down at work and use these business apps that have these AI components, you don't know what the foundational backend is. And you have to use these apps because they're really part of your work. You have to be competitive, you have to do your job and all that jazz. But when you do go to work, you're not going to be yourself. You're going to be a professional, a version of who you are. At least we hope so, right? And then the social media portion, when you're at home, you don't know what social media apps are connected to what foundational model. And we don't know what that looks like. We don't know what type of content that you're putting out there, and which foundational model they're using to basically take your data. It could be, Facebook that you have all your family and relatives on, Instagram for your close friends. Maybe you're on X and you have an anonymous profile, or Reddit, which is normally anonymous, or maybe you're using Snapchat to some extent. As AI becomes more and more incorporated into legacy, I say legacy, but existing SaaS applications, existing applications, where they put in those foundational models, are they building their own model, or are they basically using a different foundational model as a backend? The cost for GPUs are costly. Not only that, but to run them, the power consumption alone is going to be somewhat costly. So you really start thinking about the overhead, and basically training those models takes time to some extent. So the idea is, my theory is most of these SaaS applications are in fact just using foundational model on the back end to do the heavy lifting, and they have an inference, and they're basically just applying some type of context within their industry to whatever the prompt is, the tokenized version of your prompts, and then passing that on to the back end. Now, if I'm thinking about that right and I'm tracking right, what's really happened is your dimension, your work profile that you face, your show work, that is you're using tools at work, and that's going to a foundational model. Your social media that you interact with is going to a foundational model in the back end, and your communication, your applications are also going to a foundational model somewhere on the back end. Now, if you think about that, all dimensions of who you are online, whether it's your business professional, your social media, or your anonymous Xbox, PlayStation, or whatever, is all, or for anonymous forums, are all going to some type of foundational model backend. And the concern is these models, what happens if we don't know what model we're going to, and what happens if we somehow end up going to the same model, what happens at that point? That's a kind of a concern, because the issue that I think that might happen is AI is able to detect patterns and basically predict outcome. And I also think that if that is the case, and we start seeing that, if that were to happen, then the ability to dox who you are across all three profiles, all three domains, and then be able to stitch together or correlate one online profile, a fingerprint of who you are, and not just your online identity, but also your psychological profile and everything about who you are. And I know that sounds unlikely, but how would they know? I mean, if you think about the advancements of like haptic keyboards, the way you type, the tone in how you type, if you're a non-English speaker and you're basically translating into English, you could deduce from if, the grammar's not right or there's something slightly off, you can potentially reduce that, say, hey, this might be a person of X ethnicity based off of the grammar sentence and how that's normally translated. You're looking at all these different ability to aggregate data across all these different domains. And even these are just basically proxies for your data that you're outputting. And it's able to determine who you really are if it's going to one foundational model. That is the assumption. But there's a larger issue. We don't know what apps are going to what model unless they tell us. So that is still, still something that, I think that is still out there. But the idea, what I'm trying to explain, and hopefully I'm communicating correctly, all these data, all the data that you're putting out to all these different domains, if they were to go to one model, what is the potential risk of that? And number one, how do we know? Well, we don't know. Number two, it will look something like this. And as you can see, I kind of have another model here. Well, Visio, I should be doing a better job at this, but we have another diagram here, and in this diagram we have the same domains on the bottom and the same user, and now he's pushing all that data to one foundational model. Well, there's an issue with this, and the issue is, let's take a look at AI. I saw this article that caught my attention, which was AI was able to determine biological sex based off of scanning retinas over a long period of time in just data after data, it was able to find a pattern that human beings did not even know, which is basically, looking at the blood vessels in the retina and determine that the darker the blood vessels, that's a male. And basically, what's happening here is it detected a pattern that humans did not know how to do that. Well, what if you're passing all your data and it's going to one foundational model? Well, how do you know your data is not being DeepSeek, for example, hypothetically, is not learning your haptic keyboards, your keystrokes, your tone in your language, your reaction, and building a psychological profile of who you are and being able to understand the details that makes you you you're in the business side, then be able to determine your social media perspective of how you interact in those apps, and then use both of those profiles and correlate it with the anonymous data that it may get from different carriers or messenger or WhatsApp or communication profiles. At that point, it's building a tapestry. It's correlating all this data and building a profile of who you really are. Normally, most people are like, who cares, right? But the problem with that is, if it can be very dangerous, because now if you look at advertisements and market analysis and all that stuff, these, if it's in the wrong hands, it can be used to do manipulation tactics to sell you and market things to you and appease to who you are at a psychological cognitive level that's completely different. It's a very, in my opinion, it could be weaponized to harm people in a lot of ways, using your own content that you're putting through these proxy apps or inference into one foundational model, and then that model being trained so precise on who you are, and that information being leveraged against you. I think that's kind of dangerous in a lot of ways, and that's just my opinion. But there's also something even more scarier than that, which is basically, see here, this, sorry about that, which is what Sam Altman mentioned about ChatGPT. Basically, your queries with ChatGPT can be used against you in law, in a court of law, which is a bit scary. Meaning that, like, what if you get sued and you're in a discovery, session or what may have you, and they pull your query, and not only do they find that one thing that they're looking for, but now they're able to see your psychological profile that OpenAI was willing to tell them, and now they have a little bit more to who you are, and that can hurt you in a legal case or even a criminal case. Let's say, for example, you were looking at different things or whatever may have you, and even though it's misconstrued, they would have so much analysis of who you are that they would be able, prosecutors and so forth, they may be able to, in my opinion, I'm not a lawyer, but they may be able to say, hey, look, we could prove intent in a court case in a lot of ways, which can be damaging, especially depending on the crime. So I think that, like, we have to be mindful of the data that we're putting through these AI platforms, and I think that that's the key. That's the important thing. So one of the things that I did, and I apologize, close this out. I made a browser add-on called Redact. It's free. I'm not charging you guys yet. I'm just kidding. But I'm not like a developer by no means. So this is an entry level, completely laughable. And my goal is to hopefully have people try to innovate and bring innovation to this field, because I was looking for something to redact content in AI, because I was like, well, this is kind of scary. And I didn't see anything like this in the Google Play Store. So I decided to build my own. And then I realized, well, yeah, it works for me, but maybe I should market it to other people who may also find themselves in the same scenario. And just by happen, 4 days ago, Sam Altman came out with that article with that statement he made pertaining to AI, which is rather interesting. So the timing was aligned. I have here ChatGPT and I have DeepSeek in two different tabs. And what I'm going to do here, I made this, I made this browser add-on to work with copy paste function, because I believe that if you're typing data, you have the ability to self-censor. Like, it's like, if you got places or whatever, you have the ability to not say certain things. So self-censor is always the best way to go forward. But if you're working with a large data sets, or not a large data sets, but like you're copying content, whether it's a PDF, PowerPoint, or what may have you, or Notepad, and you want to copy content into AI for some type of modification of some type of analysis or what may have you, but you want to redact the content you're putting in. I think that this is where this comes in handy. So I basically have, if you guys see here, this is the browser add-on. It's called Redact Rules. I'm going to add a word. I'm going to write a word called monkeys, and I'm going to add my own variable. I want to make my variable somewhat unique, so I'll put this, all that jazz. I'm going to click Add Rule. It just tells me, hey, you added a rule called monkeys, and that's your variable. Simple enough. And I'll just leave it there. Now what I'm going to do is refresh this because the rule's been applied. You got to refresh your ChatGPT. In this example, I'm just using DeepSeek and ChatGPT. It does work for Gemini. It does work for the other AI models. I didn't try all of them, but for the most of the foundational models that I commonly use, it does. And now what I'm going to do here, I'm going to just move this up a little bit so I can see my browser add-on. And I'm just going to look at this statement that I have prepared, which is I went to the zoo and pet the monkeys and the whales. That's pretty much what I did. So I'm going to copy this content. The statement is in my clipboard. And I'm just going to go up here and I'm going to bring it down here just to show everybody this is what's in my clipboard. Notice that it's in up here and you can see perfectly fine. Now I'm going to click in here. I'm going to Control V, or actually I'm going to right click and click paste. And notice that when I click paste in the ChatGPT prompt, it basically redacted that monkeys, the value that I have here. And it's something simple. It's nothing too crazy. How about we're going to go in DeepSeek and I were to do the same thing? It does the same thing. Very straightforward. And the idea is that, at least you have the ability to self-censor the content that you're putting in. If I hit enter, sometimes the AI will try to if it's a very oversimple sentence, AI will try to understand it, meaning that if you try to redact something that says, I went to the blank game, and if you make your variables a variable for every letter, it could actually say, well, are you talking about baseball or are you talking about football? And be able to kind of, infer what basically you're trying to redact. So just be mindful of that. But the idea is, if you hit enter, I'm going to hit enter on what it's saying here. And you'll see that it sounds like you're excited time at the zoo. However, the message is scrambled. And notice that it's telling you that it doesn't understand, right? And then you could just simply say, well, yes, keep the scramble exactly as a variable. And you could see that it will then say, okay, cool, and it will just, your sentence will stay exactly as you wrote it and preserve as a mysterious variable. And, you're basically having a conversation about what it's trying to understand. It really wants to understand what that is. And in this context, it depends on what directions you place in there, but it goes to show you that it does in fact work, right? Because the way this is working, it's basically hijacking the clipboard function before it even gets into the AI. You're stopping it at the prompt, and all you're doing is using the browser as a memory, like, oh, hey, because this you might forget. And that's pretty much it. It's very straightforward. Eventually I want to release this for Firefox. I do have a pro version coming out. So this is the free version. The free version, you're allowed 3, but there is a premium version that I am working on, which gives you a little bit more redactions, and also it has no ads. That's cool. But most importantly, it has an unlock reverse redaction. So I will demonstrate that. The prototype does work for DeepSeek. I'm encountering issues with ChatGPT and other platforms because the AIs actually adding apostrophes and punctuations to it, the variable, and it breaks the inverse function of it. So I got to figure that out. That's what I'm working on. But hopefully, I really hope that this is somewhat interesting, and hopefully it makes sense to somebody. And hopefully people find it useful in some extent. Now, this is not the number one solution out there, And if you're looking at this and saying, well, a Casby can do this, hey, Palo Alto can do this, or whatever vendor firewall and all that jazz, or any DLP tool, you're 100% right. But the real question you need to ask yourself before you get into that mindset is to ask yourself, how many retail people the average mom and pop, the average person working a 9 to 5, coming home and using AI on their phone, or using AI at home, or a kid who's using AI for school, or what may have you, do you think it's reasonable to have a young kid use AI at such a young age and have his entire or her entire psychological profile being learned upon from an early age all the way to adolescence? At that point, you're looking at a very scary world where the AI is going to know who this person is and have a profile of this person as they grow into this technology. That's a scary thing if you're a parent. The world is not the same as it once was. And if you want to protect your child, I think, or if you want to protect yourself or your family member or whomever, I think I think what I've made here is a great starting point. And I think that I hope more advanced developers who are privacy focused come out with their own tools to do things like this and more, and take it to a step further and go really advanced. If you think about the VPN space, VPNs were only for enterprise, and then it evolved into its own market share as the retail folks, they realize, hey, I need my own VPN to protect myself, and that became its own market. And I think that maybe I'm late to the game, or maybe I'm completely missing the target, but I think that eventually this may be another market that's going to be coming up, and it'll be pretty cool to be first in some extent. Oh, not first, but close, right? So at least that's my thoughts. I apologize, I'm not a professional at this, and I really appreciate the opportunity. If you're listening, hopefully you're entertained, and hopefully you laugh at my my nervousness. But yeah, I appreciate everybody. Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you. Please download Redact and give it a try. And also just let everybody know, like, comment, and subscribe. This will be the official YouTube for it moving forward. I appreciate it. Thank you. You guys have a good one.